computer. And who's going to read 1.21? Oh, by the way, everyone, here we are again reading the Discourses. If I ever post this up on YouTube, probably good to introduce it. Sam's here, Jody's here, I'm here. We're still reading Discourses by Epictetus, 1.21. Fire away.
I can do it. Book one, argument 21. To people who want to be admired. When someone is properly grounded in life, they shouldn't have to look outside themselves for approval. My friend, what is it you want? I am satisfied if my desires and aversions agree with nature. If I exercise impulse and refusal as I was born to do, and if I practice purpose, design, and assent the same way. So why are you acting so stuck up? I want everyone I meet to admire me, to follow me around shouting, oh, what a great philosopher. And who exactly are these people that you want to be admired by? Aren't they the same people you're in a habit of calling crazy? And is this your life ambition then, to win the approval of lunatics?
Wow.
It's interesting because the content is more or less the same, but the words are different. Like you said, lunatic, it's madman in here, and yeah.
Well, read yours, Courtney, because it's not that long.
When
Just
someone has taken up the position, that's different too, isn't it? When someone has taken up the position that he ought to hold in life, he doesn't hanker after anything beyond it. What is it that you would wish to have happen to you, man? For my part, I'm satisfied if I exercise my desires and aversion in accordance with nature and apply my motives to act and not to act as my nature requires, and likewise my purposes, designs, and acts of assent. So why are you walking around in front of us as though you'd swallowed a spit?
Is that what it says?
Yeah, what does yours say?
Ours says, so why are you acting so stuck up?
It says as though you'd swallowed a spit. Oh, maybe it means like the long pointy
like
spit.
the long, yeah, like
yeah, it's like all puffed up.
Yeah,
right.
Straight and yeah.
What I've always wanted is to be admired by those who meet me, and that they'll follow me, exclaim, "What a great philosopher!" Who are they? These people whose admiration you want to win? Aren't they the very people whom you're in the habit of describing as mad? What do you want to be admired by, madmen? Yeah.
So he's saying like you're not it's the goal is definitely not to be seeking people's approval. We're not here to be seeking people's approval.
He says the only thing I'm interested in is being satisfied with exercising my desires, aversions in accordance with nature, and my motives to act, which is elsewhere called impulse, right? And not to act as my nature requires. And likewise my purposes, designs, and acts of assent. Does yours have the same language?
Sort of. It says, I am satisfied if my desires and aversions agree with nature, if I exercise impulse and refusal as I was born to do, and if I practice purpose, design, and assent the same way.
Yeah, and it's more direct language.
And that's when it says, so why are you acting so stuck up? So obviously this person has very good intentions, right? This person has incredibly pure intentions, but is being perceived as being stuck up, or wanting to court the approval of others or something, being aware of trying to be better. So what? They're not being humble? Is there some humility missing there or something? Or
well, I think the point is it's just that person is just acting ridiculously, because if we jump back to the handbook in Enchiridion 1, it uses the same language. It says, within our powers, our opinion, motivation, desire, aversion, in a word, whatever is of our own doing. Not within our power are our body, our property, reputation, office, and in a word, whatever is not our own doing. So he's doing that here. He's saying, well, you're acting like listening to madmen, which is not in your own power of doing, status and reputation and all that is important, but actually it's only in looking after your own inner motivation, desire, and aversion, the rest. He says the things that are within our power are by nature free and immune to hindrance and obstruction, while those that are not within our power are weak, slavish, subject to hindrance and not our own. He's just summarizing what he says in
Yeah.
Enchiridion 1, but applying it to a specific situation where
and
there's
applying
this...
it to a person who's
Yeah.
trying to play a philosopher. But
Yeah.
and he's showing that that person is being inconsistent.
Yeah.
He says he applies himself to wanting the main thing.
Mm-hmm.
When
But
someone, like the very first line, when someone is properly grounded in life, they shouldn't have to look outside themselves for approval.
I like your one, Courtney, that when someone takes the right position, or because I think it demonstrates that people with volition follow signs of nature, and I think it also adds to things later that you're yourself first. You sort of act, you play out games with everyone else. I think taking a position is like taking a role or taking that position properly.
Could be, yeah. But also you're not concerned what other people think about you, basically. The only thing that you're worried about is making good use of your own desires and aversions and acts of judgment, and making sure they're in line with the way things actually are, which is nothing can harm you. It's all up to your use of things that wherein good and evil lie, so to speak. So I think it's true, isn't it? Like, if we really want to be, like, think of something like a good therapist or a philosopher is a similar kind of thing. I just find it hard to relate to the idea of a philosopher because it's such an ancient idea. But being a good therapist is the same sort of thing, right? Like, what would that mean? That would be not worrying about curing people, not worrying about having $1 million in the bank, not worrying about whether you have 100% success rate with your clients, for example. It's not about that. It's
and
about
getting fame and renown,
it's applying it to yourself and making yourself the kind of person that has the kind of moral character that we seek in these sorts of people, right?
And all those things, anything like true admiration of character is not in anyone's control to take.
Yeah, that's right.
You can't just put up a sign saying, give it to me.
That's right.
It's in someone else's, in the same way in the argument a few ones ago, it's in your brother's control, to give you a good reputation. It's theirs to give.
I think if a person, like you're saying, is truly admirable, we kind of know it instinctually, don't we? Like, they might not have a lot of money, but there's something about the way they act, maybe selflessly or with bravery or with an eye for justice, where we just know that this is a good person. And if they are truly authentic, they're not doing it because other people are watching, and they're not doing it because they're concerned about, people going, well, I don't like the shoes that you're wearing, or you didn't quite, I don't know, you didn't say it with the right flair or whatever. None of that matters to them, right? And they still come across as admirable.
You often notice them acting that way when you're not watching.
So I guess the study is, how do you become like that? How do you not care? And just be yourself as best you can.
See, as soon as you become self-conscious of the way you're appearing too, you're in danger of being to the point where you might appear stuck up and you don't mean to,
Yeah.
Exactly. And you can even do that in the pursuit of being a good therapist or a good teacher. When you're trying to, it's so funny. Sometimes you can naturally, organically fall into a flow and appreciate, this is a time where our character or our qualities are really shining. And then a week later, you can fake your way pretending to go back into it. And it's a very poor imitation.
Yeah.
Even chasing some equality.
I think it's one of the sad things about seeing professional speakers become popular. Like Jordan Peterson's a good example, because at the beginning, when he was just a professor, he had some interesting stuff to talk about.
He did.
But now that he's like a monkey on the stage and he's got to perform like weekly or whatever for every show and have an opinion on every political event. It's changed it. He's become kind of
It,
hard to watch as a result.
in his words, which I've watched very carefully over time and used, he's become the dead father. He's become a lot like a memory of what he's been, or that edifice of knowledge that he's created. But he's not alive. He's not active. He doesn't have the eyes of the attentive hero that brings all the force of and action and potency of tradition to life in your generation. He reminds me of was it John Turner's father in Pirates of the Caribbean?
Oh, yeah.
When he's part of the crew, part of the ship,
That's
and
right.
He's just become this sort of dead barnacle.
He's become encrusted with.
Yeah. It's a Horus and Osiris sort of problem. It's just natural. It's also aging.
Well, I see it as more pernicious than that from a Stoic point of view. For example, I was thinking about pretty much this exact problem. Like, to be famous seems desirable from the point of view of the common opinion. Remember, the Stoics are often critiquing their common opinion, but it's actually undesirable in some very important regards because you get sucked into it. You get sucked into, well, I've got to put on a good show. I've got to walk around like I got to spit up my ass, like you've got to be on display and you have to dress in good clothes and you have to say the right thing in the interview. Otherwise, you're going to look foolish and people aren't going to buy your videos anymore or whatever. And if you think about it, I think this is what Marcus Aurelius was getting at a little bit, where he was saying, I kind of wish I wasn't the emperor. I kind of would have preferred to be a librarian or something. And because if you think about it from a Stoic point of view, the emperor is disadvantaged a little bit because he's got all the temptation of pushing people around and getting whatever he wants with it when he wants it. He doesn't have the reality check that every other normal human being has. And Stoicism is really made for ordinary human beings. And so for Marcus Aurelius, that must have been incredibly challenging. And I think he makes that point in chapter 1 when he says, I'm so grateful that I didn't sleep with the slaves when I was a young person, and I'm glad that I learned to be disciplined, because he could have, he could have got whatever he wanted whenever he wanted it, but he learned to tame that part of himself.
Well, any political leader, like any potential political leader, have got to look past into their past life now. You can't go and put yourself forward as a candidate if you've got skeletons in the closet. You can't. You've got to have had a very pure life that you're not going to be able to have many fingers pointed at you, because they will come and cancel you if they can.
Well, that's one aspect, but the more important one from a Stoic point of view is that what if you just boil it down to, what are we trying to learn from Stoicism? Well, we're trying to learn something like being able to extend our optimal functioning beyond this restrictive environment to encompass whatever the environment throws at us, so that we become a fully developed human rational organism. And that means that whenever misfortune impinges upon us, we go, good, this is good. This is me testing my rational boundaries, and I'm going to accept it and see if I can take my attention off the external conditions, and instead put the attention on my ability to become more rational, more able to be cognitively flexible or whatever, so that I can adapt and take on the right view, so that I understand that this is not a problem for me, whatever the environment throws at me. See, the emperor's going to struggle with that, because he's like, well, what's stopping me from just calling the Praetorian Guards and killing everyone,
And that comes up in the arguments later. And I think as a culture, because we like status and then believe the tragedies of kings or emperors, and we're excited by, well, if this is the tragic life they have, everyone wants to emulate it. I think we're sort of trapped in a narrative that's useful for them to lay out because they start off with so much, but not useful for the individual.
Well, that's right. But the Stoics would say that we have a preconception of the good. So we have a knowledge of what's actually good. And so when we look at the king who has the power to kill everybody, we go, wow, look at that power. That's admirable because it touches upon the preconception of power. Like it's felt innately to us that power must be good. But the Stoics are going to say, well, true power is not killing people. True power is being able to become that optimal organism that overcomes the restrictions of the environment through his use of his internal capacities, not by seeking to push around the external world, which is morally indifferent. That's just a bunch of, ones and zeros colliding in space or whatever. So that's kind of interesting, isn't it, from that point of view? So power is important, but the only power that matters is the power he's talking about here, to exercise my desires and aversions in accordance with nature and apply my motives to act and not to act as my nature requires. It's up to me.
It's another T-shirt slogan. You could have the other one on the front and this on the back. Really,
Yeah. But that happens a few arguments ago, and you've been bringing it up, all these weeks, that people resonate with that power, but they confuse the sign for the power.
Yeah, that's right.
The sign for the direction.
Yeah. Well, that's the argument. They say there's an innate conception of the good, but the problem is it's very general. So it's a general force. But when we look into the world of external things, which we try somehow, we confuse or mix these specific events and call those specific events kind of examples of this, more generalized kind of thing.
And there was an argument a few ones ago where it said, you don't worship the prophet for the prophet's sake, or the seer for the seer's sake, but for the signs that they.
That's right.
In order to align with nature.
Yeah,
you should worship aligning with nature.
That's exactly right. Yeah, well said. Much better than my butchered attempt to say it. Yeah, that's exactly right. So once you understand that, and you talk to people, because this comes up in therapy for me, so you can apply this to real people situations, is they'll say things like the prison example was a good one that came up recently, where I said to the people, like, oh, what are your deep down values, the thing that you value most in all the world? And they picked a preconception. They said freedom. Freedom is the most important thing in the whole world. And I know I've told you guys this, but I think it just hits the nail on the head because
it does.
They're right. They're right. The organism, the rational being, seeks freedom like it seeks power. And that power and freedom are just different words for that same power, which is virtue, the good.
Yeah.
If you knew how to use freedom, you would be that optimal organism. But the freedom they're talking about, the one that always is available to you and beyond restriction and all that, is not dependent on any external force, is the freedom to be able to make use of your own inner rational capacities. Unfortunately, they've made a category error. They were thinking of this kind of freedom that the Stoics are interested in when they went and became a drug dealer, because they thought that's what freedom meant, given their limited understanding of how to translate that feeling into reality, kind of thing.
Can I say something a bit gross? It's like fetishization. It functions very similarly. You taking the image of it's like sexual obsession, or fetishization of the ankles, or something like that. You're taking something deeply motivational and associating and framing it as like, well, no, as long as I only have this one specific, highly specific thing, I'm like cramming the image or that ideal of the good, into this one thing. I have to have this one thing, and that's
but that's right.
The cable tying of the ankles. What? Sorry. What?
No, but you're right.
I didn't say cable tying. I use a nice example of like a Victorian revelation of the ankles. You
Yeah.
say cable tying. So that might be your preconception.
No, but that's very true. And I mean, if you ask anybody, you can play around with this. So, I've started doing it with people saying, oh,
I'm
it's hard.
sorry, Sam. I totally misconstrued what you said about that. When you brought up ankles, then I just wasn't
Jody,
quite sure.
you've just got a dirty mind, that's all.
Please don't put this up on.
Gonda, stop it.
Please don't put this up on YouTube.
No, that's cool. But yeah. Oh yeah, but like you can ask people, like play around with it. Say, if you really boiled it down, what's your deepest desires? And they might say sexual things and say one way to avoid that is to say, well, what are your deepest values? Because I've been trying to get the language right so modern people can hear what you're talking about. And they say, oh, okay, I get what you're saying. Well, I really value, and they'll say a bunch of superficial stuff, but if you kind of quiz them a bit and dig down, they'll say things that are very specific. Like this guy I've got in therapy, he worked out, he's got social phobia and he's struggling with it, and that's what we talk about. But he believes deep down and sees himself as an adventurer. Like it took us a while to get to it, but that's the preconception, and it's again a meld of power and freedom, right? Because the adventurer is the person who is constantly in awe of the world as it reveals itself, which is an optimal state for the organism. It's like, I need to be curious about the environment that's what life's about. That's what gives you joy. He has that in his heart. So you don't have to convince him of that. He knows it. He's aware of it. Now, the trick was then to get him to apply that to his social phobia. And I was like, well, are you really an adventurer or are you just pretending? And he's like, what do you mean? Because now I was drawing on his inconsistency. That's what the Epictetus is talking about. So I said, well, you say you're an adventurer and you've done all this adventurous stuff, but you can't even go to a party. And he was like, I'll show you. And he went to the party and he had a great time. And then he came back and he was like, oh my God, guess what? Turns out I can do these things if I apply the view that it's like an adventure, because I know how to do that. Isn't that very similar to what Epictetus is talking about?
It's exactly, if I reflect, what you've done is a broadening in the same with him. What he's done, really, you've encouraged him to do, is the broadening of the built-up character in the same way that Epictetus is asking the athlete to say, well, what's the infallible athlete? Is it someone who just physically performs, or is it someone who acts on the stage they take in all these sort of ways, in this kind of character? And I think you've helped him, and he's helped himself with that framing to get excited about, well, no, I really feel like I'm this kind of person, but I could be but he's so narrowly specified on the sign. He's stuck on the sign.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. He's caught up on these hang-ups.
Yeah.
But the point too is that, if you know the good, and for him the good is adventure, if whatever you call it and you know it deep down, there's nothing inside you really that's going to stop you from enacting the good. And this is that whole Socratic idea that to have the concept of the good precipitates motivation. You start to grow in that direction. You start to move towards that selection. So yeah, sorry, Jody. Yeah,
it's just been very interesting, you bringing up the biological side, like you reflected on that biological side of the organism moving towards the good, right? What the organism sees as the good. So the organism is going to move towards resources. So, for example, a single-celled animal, paramecium or what's the other one, amoeba, taxus, going through taxus towards a resource. They're going to eat the resource. Well, to me, that's like Christopher Columbus heading out and discovering the Americas or whatever. But you're lifting it to this other level. But it's the same principle.
Oh, totally. I think that's what they're talking about. Yeah. But the distinction is, well, what what about being a rational being makes that different than a purely non-rational organic kind of
Well,
instinct?
not much, I don't think. I think the principle is very similar.
Well,
I don't.
it does invite little difficulties. Like, for example, there are situations in which if the Stoic can't act rationally, he'd rather commit suicide.
Maybe I'm probably extrapolating too much, but you know, we've talked a lot about the microcosm to the macrocosm.
Mm.
That's probably the link I'm thinking of here,
No,
rather than
I agree with you.
rather than the jump between you know, irrational, not irrational, but non-rational, sorry, non-rational
Yeah.
to rational
You're
being.
you're exactly right. Like it's a development. It's a developmental picture. So like these less evolved animals, if you like, have constitutional needs. So they're attracted to food and water and sugar and whatever, not too much heat, not too much cold. And they manage themselves very intricately because they know how to reach out to the good. They have an innate awareness of the good, a preconception. And so do we. And we do all the same things that the organism does. Like we maintain homeostasis most of the time. We do all this stuff. But we are also doing something much more developed. We've developed this rational capacity, and that means that that rational capacity changes our constitutional needs to be of a higher order. And this is where we get into the principles of the philosophy. So, for example, they say that when the rational creature gets its constitutional needs met, that's the end. That's the completion of the end. But it also experiences pleasure, which is the relief of meeting that end. And unfortunately, the rational creature is the type of creature that kind of reflects on that association and maybe accidentally makes pleasure the goal then as a result. And can that's how the senses can kind of mislead us and cause us to go astray. And that's why they say we need to rely on our rational properties, our rational capacities, rather than our sensory ones, because the sensory ones are identical to the ones that the more basic organisms use and lead to problematic kind of consequences for a creature like us, which has developed this extra kind of capacity.
And I think that's true said in a lot of other places, that as soon as human beings get what they want, they die.
Mm.
Like they're finished. Like
Human beings. I think that's true for what do you call them? Praying mantises, that's for sure.
no, that's also exactly true. But we like the ride and can think about the ride along the way. And so to satisfy or to try and satiate ourselves with pleasure, one is the category error, but two, you'd be done. You know, like if you had everything you wanted at 70.
Well, yeah, I guess
Why'd
the
you live to 80?
idea it's to be living as an animal. That's
Yeah.
what's problematic about it. It's limiting. When
Yeah.
you've been given this other faculty that animals apparently lack, self-consciousness, the ability to be free in any situation, to keep to use this faculty that can't even be blocked or inhibited by external things. And through exercising that, you're constantly free. Like existentially, you can be Sisyphus on that mountain pushing the rock up the hill. And just like Camus says, we can imagine
That
Sisyphus
is happy.
happy because that's his act of rebellion. And in a way, that fits with the Stoic thing too. We're born, we don't get to choose what happens to us. You could get cancer, you could get hit on the head with a rock, but it doesn't matter because just like Sisyphus, your act of retaliation against reality is to say, well, I'll accept whatever you give me. So ha ha ha. And that makes you respond rationally to whatever environment has been given to you. And that way you're the one who determines your growth, not pleasure, nothing like that, because that's restricted to just the animal side of life. And that's why it's such a fascinating philosophy, because it's not an act of faith, it's a fact. It's basically existentialism in a sense. in at least one reading of it.
It's also just living,
Yeah,
like, like,
but
like it's living for life. But I like the parts earlier where human beings have to opt into it.
you have to opt into it. That's what I was going to say. Is yeah, it's living. It's so obvious. We all do it, but
Yeah.
how many people are aware of the power of their own choice?
Mm.
Not many.
No,
Oh, I
most.
hate my job. Why do you hate your job? Why can't you say, oh, my job's a challenge and I don't always feel like I enjoy it, but I'm glad that I'm being pressured by it so that I can explore my capacity for resilience? That would be a more stoic kind of response.
But also, there's also still a choice that you quit that job and you go and do
Yeah.
something else. Like
You
that,
could
there
do
is
that.
the freedom. There is that total freedom.
There's that
That's what
freedom
I love
too.
about it. There is that freedom in every way possible you can imagine. That's what
But
I love
another
about it.
thing I imagine the Stoics saying now and more is that they might even be saying, "Hey, guess what? You don't like your job, but guess what? It helps you support your family, and that's the stuff that actually matters because you're part of this organic social network, whatever. And you hate your job, maybe that's a good thing because, rather than like you're saying, Jody, rather than go, oh, well, I can quit and go and live under a bridge. The other side of that, which I think the Stoics are really getting at, is good. I'm glad you don't like it because that's a sign that you're holding the wrong opinions about things. What you should be doing is going, okay, bring it on, bring it on, bring on this dislike because I'm being irrational when I don't like it. I've got to learn that it can't harm me. I've got to learn that I can make whatever use of it I like. I can go to my job and not have to dislike it because I choose the view that I have of it.
But you still have an ultimate choice of placing yourself
Oh yeah.
wherever you really want to be, wherever you really want to place yourself
But my
too.
question is, and this comes up in psychopathology a lot. I mentioned it the other day, is that human beings, well, rather than deal with the difficulties or the challenges of the environment, if there's a way out, they'll often take it. And what that means is they can return to a much more limited environment, which is less threatening and less dangerous, more in their control, but they're not growing as a result. They're just constraining the limits of the petri dish to a safe, manageable set that they can do what they like in. Wouldn't it be
Well, then they're
better?
not. They're not operating with courage, are they? So they've
No.
got to look at their suite of virtues and start looking across all virtue, and always never forget, all the four virtues in everything they entail.
Well, to live optimally means to bust out of the petri dish and say, whatever the world gives me is good enough for me. That's what Marcus Aurelius says. It's good enough for me.
And in their petri dish, they're acting as petty tyrants to take control over the
Yeah,
small world which makes them a prisoner of
they are.
themselves, of their own kingdom that they
But
have
if
And
they had,
control
but
over,
if they had
rather
true
than being a
courage,
free explorer. Yeah.
but if they had true courage, they would rise above that, wouldn't they? Like
they
if
could, but that's why I agree with Sam that I think that the true tyrant, the tyrant in that picture, is disadvantaged in this work than the average Joe, because the average Joe is accustomed to having to be under pressure and not be able to murder everybody if he if he feels like they're giving him trouble.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, well, that's right. But you got to read Boethius, Sam.
Yeah.
He's great
Yeah.
because that's exactly the question that he's stuck with. We've read it a few times in the book club, but he's going to be murdered, and this is a true story. He's writing a diary or whatever, and he's contemplating with Lady Philosophy, and at the end he says that there's this beautiful kind of line in there where he's contemplating how is it possible that the tyrant gets to get away with all this terrible stuff, and me, the good person, is going to die this horrible death. How is that just? And then he goes on about the powerless power. No, the powerless power of the tyrant. And it's exactly what we're talking about, that it's a powerless power. And the only power is the kind of power that these philosophers are talking about.
And it takes me back to Plato's description of the tyrant in uh, Republic. In the Republic, Sam, you would have read that, wouldn't you?
Not yet.
The description of the tyrant in Plato's Republic.
Not yet. Not yet. I've seen it.
It's a
Maybe
good
other versions.
it's a good exploration of the tyrant, of the nature of a tyrant. It's
I think the system makes the tyrant. It makes everyone's life a prison, and they're the prisoner and the prison guard. They're the first ones.
And the tyrant still makes a lot of sense within this model of human psychology because the tyrant clearly knows the good. In fact, like a person who's not born as a tyrant, imagine somebody who's like a Robespierre or something from the French Revolution. He has a beautiful ideal. He grasps the good so clearly. Well, those people are really dangerous.
I know, yeah.
Because what they can do with the good is they can kill everybody. Because they can go, you guys are getting in the way because you don't have the same conception of the good that I have. And this is communism, right? And all those sort of revolutions. They mean really well. They have this scintillating, clear conception of the good. If only you guys could see it the way I could see it. And it's a religious thing too, right?
And because you do have that genuine observation of the good and then constraining it, you're so motivated and you can demonstrate that and make a play of it.
Yeah.
And then other people, it's dangerous to other people because they know something, but they're not telling you. So other people will opt in on their own volition. They'll keep themselves because they're excited for the good and will accept this terrible version of it.
Yeah.
Like it's a cult. That's cultish.
Oh, yeah. Well, and you see it in religions all the time. But the idea is, insofar as that version of the good relates to the external world and external things that shouldn't have nothing to do with you in a certain sense, they're just the world, morally neutral. When you conflate those two things, you can become a terrible person. You can be a Hitler.
Yeah.
So anyway, when you think about it, when I think about it that way, I don't see Hitler as evil. I see him as someone who's possessed by a vision of the good.
Yeah. He's a terrible art student. Terrible in the deepest way. that he sees the picture and is corrupted.
Yeah, but also Plato would say we all do that to a greater or lesser extent. And in fact, like, people complain about how pathetic the average Joe is, but the average Joe is safe because the average Joe doesn't have an overpowering conception of the good. He can easily be convinced one way or another, and that's where he falls prey to the tyrant or the rhetorician or whatever, is because his good is malleable. He has a weak conception of the good.
But I think the average Joe also has an advantage that if his community or a society has reasonable approximations of the good, that he's willing to follow that reasonably well and get its benefits. Where someone that can abstract further can run themselves further out.
Yeah. But of course the Stoics are wise because they're saying, whoa, Nelly, whoa, slow the hell down. It's not about power over people. It's not about having all the wealth so that you can distribute it to the people. It's got nothing to do with that. First, you've got to learn to have power over your own desires and be in control of your aversions and your impulses in such a way that they align with nature. And then you should be able to be a much more just leader. And obviously that's kind of the model of the leader that Marcus Aurelius is very much keyed into. Unfortunately, he did a shit job communicating that to Commodus. You're aware, Sam, right, that his son was a total nut job?
Yeah, didn't he? Wasn't it an adopted son as well?
No, I think it was a real son.
Commodus. He was a real son. He was a real son.
And he was a psychopath, apparently. All right. Well, we just spent like an hour on that paragraph. I think we've just... Well, it's no surprise, though, because it's so similar to Enchiridion 1, right?
It is in a way.
And it jumps ahead. What we did with it jumps ahead into all sorts of arguments, but their applications, they're just a spread out.
Well, and the good news is if what we've just been discussing is really on preconceptions, well, the next one's called On Preconception. So who would like to read that? Hopefully it's going to actually speak to what we've been talking about.
Well, I'll start it, and if we stop me if we get to a point where you want to stop and talk about it.
I can tell you honestly, the way my brain works is if we read like more than a page, I can't remember what came
That's
before.
right. So I'll stop about halfway. 1, everyone has preconceptions, and one preconception does not contradict another. I mean, who of us does not assume that what is good is beneficial and choice in all cases to be desired and pursued? Who of us does not assume that justice is fair and appropriate? So where does conflict come in? In the application of preconceptions to particular cases. One person, for instance, will say, well done, there's a brave man, while another says, he isn't brave, he's just deranged. This is how conflict originates, and it is the source of difference among Jews, Syrians, Egyptians, and Romans. They don't dispute that what is holy should be preferred above everything else, and in every case pursued, but they argue, for example, over whether it is holy or unholy to eat pork. This is also the basis of the conflict between Agamemnon and Achilles. Call them up before us. What do you say, Agamemnon? Shouldn't we do what is right and proper? Naturally. What about you, Achilles? Wouldn't you, of all people, say that we ought to do what is appropriate? Of course. All right, then, apply your preconceptions. It is just here that conflict starts, because one says, I shouldn't have to return Chryseis to her father, and the other says, indeed, you'd better. It's obvious that one of them is misapplying his preconception of what is appropriate. Then Agamemnon says, fine, if I give you Chryseis back, then I should get one of the other men's prizes in return. Achilles says, it's not mine you intend to take, I hope. Yours, that's right. Why should I be penalized? Because it's not right that I be the only one to go without. And this is how conflicts originate. You want me to stop there?
Yeah. But do you agree? I mean, do you understand? I mean, I think that fits with what we were talking about, that people all have this innate awareness of the good that they're calling preconceptions. And basically it boils down to, and this is where some people say, oh, isn't it true that different cultures, they have different ideas of, good things? Well, apparently not. They're saying when you really boil it down, we all agree that some things are beneficial, some things confer advantage. We don't mix that up. We know what that's like, We all have that in common. It's just when we try to apply it to situations, people have competing interests. But the desire is the same desire to get what is beneficial, to do well in life, to not be thwarted, to have all the advantage.
And it's the particularization of having to live individualized lives.
Mm.
It'll be easier. That's another reason why the issues we're in as a rational animal. All the sheep, or all the antelope, the herd of antelope, react to the good, react towards life. They run away from the lion and go towards the fresh water in the herd without stepping on each other, really.
Mm.
They're really one organism in a super sense, without much disruption.
Maybe, but also you can see
we are too, but we just have added the particulars.
Yeah, but you could also see that like animals, well, they have individual kind of actions and behaviors. So I can imagine that they just don't think about it. So the animal is like stimulus and response. So yeah, the dog sees you take his bone, so he bites you on the hand. But in this case, if instead of having that preconception and then interpreting the meaning of it for me differently from, between Achilles and Agamemnon, if they knew better, they would apply the idea of doing well to the use of the things that have nothing to do with external events. And they would apply it to themselves instead, to their desires and their aversions and things, their rational faculties. And then they wouldn't have to go to war with each other because they would use the difficult situation to kind of grow themselves in the way that actually matters. That's kind of the idea.
If they ultimately understood the good without their examples, they wouldn't be at war with Troy in general.
No, they wouldn't.
But in their because that whole disruption is a civil war split in the same way.
Yeah.
But as well, just between these two, the good that they commonly are assenting to is, well, Greeks when they win a war should keep their prize. That they should keep the
Yeah, that's
they
what the
should
Greeks
keep
think.
yeah, and they both agree on that in general, but they're taking the specific sign and picture that, oh, that should be true in every case and you shouldn't deprive me of that.
Yeah.
But for Agamemnon, what he should have learned this time, if he's not going to do it in the big way, is, well, when we're all being played because you have stolen Chryseis and not given it back to her father, because at this point in the story they're all being struck down by Apollo. Anyway.
But they're all obsessed with an external thing, you
yes.
know, like the woman in this case.
Yes.
But you know, I forgot what I was going to say anyway. But yeah, no.
But it's not the particular; it's on the application. They actually have very similar ideas of what is good.
So if they didn't apply this general, you know, the preconception to in this faulty way, if they didn't assent to this faulty impression that some bad thing was happening in the world because of the actions of these other people, but rather I could just, you know, apply the preconception to myself. If they could do that consistently, there'd be no such thing as war. That's kind of one of the things they're saying. So Epictetus is also saying sometimes throughout the discourses that these wonderful heroic or Homeric stories of war that we tell ourselves are just tragedies where people misuse reason. And if they used reason properly, then it wouldn't happen.
Yeah, they were all tales about passion, weren't they, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and they're not even growing to manage their level. That's what Achilles and Agamemnon are failing to do.
And like you said about the animal thing, and you kind of made it sound like it was different. Well, Epictetus later makes an analogy or where he compares them directly to animals. He says it's the stork nest getting knocked down and all that sort of stuff. He's saying it's the same thing as when animals do destroy each other or their homes get destroyed. It's irrelevant.
He's saying it in a derogatory way, of course, you know.
Yeah. There's nothing good here about Achilles' anger. Whereas maybe earlier Greeks probably thought there were something heroic. I don't know about. Yeah.
Indeed. How about I finish the rest of this section? Yeah.
I'll just keep interrupting you just to annoy you.
That's all right. So 9, what does it mean to get an education? To be getting an education? It means learning to apply natural preconceptions to particular cases as nature prescribes and distinguishing what is in our power from what is not. The operations of the will are in our power. Not in our power are the body's parts, property, parents, siblings, children, country, or friends. Where should we put the good then? To which of the two classes of things are we going to assign it? To the class of things in our power. It follows that neither health nor fitness are good, nor are our children, parents, or country. That view is not going to win you many friends or converts, says someone. Well, let's transfer the designation good to health and other externals and see what happens. Suppose someone meets with misfortune and loses these goods. Can they still be happy? Impossible, they say. You might ask, too, how they will remain on good terms with their neighbours, since we naturally incline to self-interest. And if it is in my interest to own land, it is in my interest to rob them of it. If it is in my interest to own a coat, it is in my interest to pinch one from the bars. There you have the genesis of wars, factions, and seditions. And how will I be able to stay right with God? Because if I'm harmed and meet with misfortune, I begin to doubt whether he is looking after me. And if he won't help me, why should I give him my regard? I want nothing to do with a God who allows me to be in my proper state. my present state, so I begin to hate him and wonder if the temples and statues we dedicate to him are not intended to placate a malignant force like fever. Honorary titles like Saviour, Rainbringer, and Fruitbringer are no longer applicable to him. And all this comes of identifying the good with externals. What should we do? That's the topic of inquiry for the person who is truly out to philosophize and think deep. Now, if I'm in the dark as to what is good and bad, I'm crazy. But if I locate the good in the realm of the will, I risk being ridiculed. Some grey old man rattling his gold rings and shaking his head at me will come along and say, listen, my boy, philosophy's all right up to a point, but don't get carried away. This question is ridiculous. Philosophers can teach you logic, but you know better than they do. But you know better than they do the right way to behave. Well, if I know what to do, as you say, don't make an objection if what I choose to do is philosophize. And the other one's, I'm not going to try to engage this fatuous old fool in logic, but if I ignore him altogether, he'll explode in indignation. So I have no choice but to say to him, humour me as you would someone in love. I can't help myself, you see. I'm mad.
Mm.
Wow.
So hang on, I got lost at the end then.
We'll read that.
Who said
Courtney,
that bit at the end?
Well, you read from yours aloud. Read
The young
yours.
philosopher.
The young guy?
The young guy who wants philosophy.
So what are we to do? This is the object of inquiry for someone who's truly a philosopher and whose mind is pregnant with thoughts. At present, he says, I can't see what's good and what's bad, so surely I'm mad. Yes, but what if I place the good somewhere here among things that lie within the sphere of choice? Everyone will laugh at me. Here we go. Some white-haired old man with many rings on his fingers will come along and shake his head and say to me, listen to me, child. Yes, one ought to practice philosophy, but one should also keep one's head. This is sheer stupidity. It's all very well for you to learn syllogisms from the philosophers, but when it comes to how you should act in life, you know that far better than they do. Yeah. Then, okay, the end of the quote. Then why are you finding fault with me, man, if I know that? What am I to say to this slave? If I keep silent, he loses his temper. So I can only reply, you must forgive me as one forgives lovers. I've lost control of myself. I'm out of my mind. It's kind of worded funny, isn't it?
Is he sort of saying, like, sometimes it's not worth trying to pursue argument or dialectic with people, or if they're going to be difficult, as he called this fellow a fatuous old fool in logic.
Yeah, he's calling the old man a slave, right?
Yes, he is, yeah. Because the old man says, no, your common behavior, your common opinions, they're what should define your life. Really, you shouldn't philosophize.
Yeah.
And then he's saying, and then the young philosopher is saying, well, if you say I know what to do, then if I choose to philosophize, then that was a good choice, right?
Oh, yeah,
like,
I see.
And then he's like, well, I'm basically not going to argue with him. I'm going to play the part which comes.
You're right. He's
in an argument later.
He's playing along.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't just keep silent either. He doesn't ignore the old man because the old man loses his temper. Yeah, you're right.
Because the role he can take in this argument, like the actor, the character that he can play in this argument, to sort of accept on usefulness the value of the tyrant, is play along. It's well, sure, I guess you're right. I guess I don't know what's good or bad. You'll just have to forgive me. You'll have to forgive me like someone young in love, because I'm chasing. It's
weird, isn't it?
I think it comes up again later.
It probably does.
Because there's a part in two arguments that are like living like that is like being part of a play of kings that's just put on randomly or put on arbitrarily, and you'd have to play your part to stay up with everyone, but you wouldn't ultimately give away your own real freedom. So he's protecting what's really his, as well as placating someone.
I wonder too if there's, I could be wrong, but in the this is Roman, obviously, but in the earlier Greek, they had this idea of a divine madness, and it kind of reads a bit like that. You must forgive me as one forgives lovers, you know. Um, we can imagine someone who we kind of forgive the person who's lovesick, or you know, kind of has that divine madness, like a religious kind
Well,
of
the
experience.
Sufis were renowned for that because
Yeah,
they had the analogy of being drunk on wine with the as being the same as with the love of God. So
that's kind
that,
of what
that
I
same
mean.
madness, that same madness was you know, a very poetic way for them to express.
Because I can
Uh,
imagine this young philosopher has a boundless enthusiasm and a kind of joy about himself. And even though he's talking in this kind of seemingly stupid way to the old serious man, this spirit of gravity, as Nietzsche would say, right? He's actually drunk on love, and philosophy is the love of wisdom. So yeah, he's like, oh yeah, just forgive me. I'm just a nut job because I'm in love with life, you know. This
I
kind of
loved it
thing.
this part when I read it last week because I think you're right. I think it's both. It's sort of masking a little bit. It's lying to the old man, but I feel like Epictetus is often taking everyone down or
Mm,
kind of poking everyone. And I had to laugh at myself.
yeah.
It's like, yeah, it is like that. Like to swap one
can
love for
can you
another.
can you look with me again too while we were in this section? Just this 15. And how will I be able to stay right with God? Because if I'm harmed and meet with misfortune, I begin to doubt
Mm.
whether He's looking after me. And if He won't help me, who should I give? Uh, why should I give Him my regard? So it's an interesting part because we often read Epictetus's appraisal of God or the God, you know, the gods, and so here he's saying he's trying to um, clarify his attitude to God, which is great, you know,
Well,
to
yeah.
see him explaining him in true relation to how he feels to God. I
Well,
just,
he's saying
it's lovely.
if people are obsessed with, well, if people are only paying attention to external things not in their control,
That's
then
right.
of course they'll inevitably become angry with God.
And their relationship with God will be tainted by that. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
yeah,
But if we remember back in 1.2 or 1.3, he talks about, yeah, that's what happens if you focus on external things which aren't given to you and they don't belong to you. However, Zeus gave you something much more powerful. He gave you this inner faculty of reason. And if you invest your time and effort there and all of your attention on cultivating that, well, you're cultivating the part of yourself that is part of Zeus, you know, which is most like him. And through that, you will live piously and all the rest of it. Not to focus on that leads to misfortune and, well, feelings that you're being cheated in life because it's like, oh my God, this is terrible. I didn't get the promotion that I thought I deserved. God must hate me, that asshole.
Yeah, yeah. Which is could be translated to saying you resent living or having to still want to live.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it's also very literal too, because I
Yeah,
think if we remember the context, this is written in a time when people had statues of gods lying around everywhere. You know, they probably did little sacrifices to their little home gods and stuff every morning. You know, so we're talking about a culture, and he's taking the perspective of an ordinary young man who's learning philosophy, who's probably going to the temple and praying to Zeus, and he's probably got his fetishes at home or whatever they're called, and and he's becoming ungrateful because he's been sacrificing to them and doing the supplications and that, but he's still dissatisfied or disappointed with things because he's focusing on the wrong things.
which I
Yeah.
think is a reflection on why Homer is over focusing on a set of externals. Because that whole problem with the Chrysias is people only pray like that or beg like that when something goes really wrong, when they've
Mm.
connected with externals and then they've really not gotten what they wanted. And that's when they're throwing themselves before altars.
Yeah, I remember all of these Hellenistic schools have identified that as the main issue, that man is, if he lives in the world of events, will always be tossed around by misfortune. And that's where the imagery of the Wheel of Fortune comes in for Boethius. One minute he's at the top, he's the king, and then he gets deposed and he's at the bottom and he's being tortured by his enemies. And it's like, how can man live in a state like that? It's so fortune is a bitch, I think even Seneca goes on about it like that. And that they think there's got to be a way off the wheel. Well, there is. And the way off the wheel is to not associate value with the external world, only associate value with your use of your internal capacity, rational part.
If you want to ever have conversations with Buddhists and Taoists, you should start with that analogy first, because their wheel is a style of reincarnation, that the world just goes around and around over 10,000 years. And then there's the solution asked in that culture is sort of enlightenment. So that might be a good grounds to start with, and then see what the output is.
Samsara, Sam?
Yeah, that's one word for it.
I don't know any Buddhists. It's really funny because people always say to me, "Oh, that sounds like Buddhism," and I honestly don't know anything about Buddhism. I always go, "Does it? Oh, cool."
I don't know if the outcome is the same or the direction or the choice out of that is the same, but the Wheel of Fortune is the same starting place.
Yeah,
the culture noticing that is.
We read Alan Watts, didn't we, Jody?
Yeah,
but is he being traditionally Buddhist when he was doing that? Like, it starts off good, but then he ends up at a point where he's like, well, it's all an illusion, so I might as well be an alcoholic, because what does it matter? I'm kind of enlightened already. It's all a big dream. Whatever happens is good enough for me. I don't like that passivity. Like, I'm like, well, no, the Stoics are saying, actually, you've got this faculty you could use, which will cultivate this really powerful character within yourself. Or you can just go, well, it doesn't matter what I do. I could just be a pedophile if I want, because it's just part of the way the world is. Like, no, that's no good. That's not useful.
When I've experimented with both the Western attraction back to being deliberately embodied is more interesting to me. Sorry, go ahead, Jody.
The other one excuses too much stuff, like we can change our lives. We can be, we can, like this is saying, if everyone thought like this, maybe one of the consequences would be less conflict. There'd be a lot less conflict. So it has real important effects on at least the quality of people's lives. But see, the Zen, it seems like Alan Watts would say, so what? So what? It doesn't matter if everyone's dying en masse or whether they're having a good time. It doesn't matter. It's all an illusion. And I mean, I didn't like that side of it. Jody's staring at the ceiling like she's trying to think, well, I didn't read it like that.
No, yeah, I'm really trying to think back hard on my reading of that and that particular era of that time of those people. They were pretty much tarred with the same brush through that era.
But we read it recently, remember?
Yes, we did.
And I was really struck by it because I really like Alan Watts, and I was like, that's what I don't like about Alan Watts. That was kind of, and he died an alcoholic at the end, and I remember thinking, well, yeah, it's no wonder, like, I don't even think he was depressed necessarily. It's just that he's like, well, what's the point?
It was his choice.
Yeah, it's my choice.
Yeah.
But I mean, that could be an excuse for all sorts of horrible things. I mean, that's fairly benign, but what if you're doing something that you really shouldn't be doing,
Or if you treat yourself with that illusion level and foster some kind of pathological resentment of other people, he's going to blame it on himself. If you externalize that at the same time, you can be very dangerous.
We can only hope that what it actually means is something a bit like the Stoics, that it creates a certain disposition. So like maybe he's trying to say, if you treat it as if it's an illusion, then you won't do nasty things to people. But then again, if it's an illusion, why wouldn't I do nasty things to people? Because it's not real anyway.
And go ahead, Joe.
I've always puzzled. Sorry, Sam, you go.
I was going to say that depends on what you do once you have enlightenment. I don't see in that kind of model. Like there are aspects where some of the characters or some of the Buddhas, what they do after accepting everything is to go back and help and inform other people.
Yeah.
Yes, but the bodhisattva.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I mean, we can't wait until we become enlightened. That's the problem. We have to make up our minds now. We need a pretty decent, like, ethical kind of philosophy to follow, I think. Look, I don't know enough about it. I'm probably giving it like the straw man argument. I'm very sorry, Jody. You can.
No, not at all. No, because I'm much more in favor of the Stoic viewpoint. I am, because I do believe that now, right now, is where we can't be. We are concerned in this lifetime to do the ultimate, to act as virtuously as possible, and that's that. There's no other way around it.
I think that reading is really something that people can come to, because remember when we read Schopenhauer, he did the same thing. He said the world prior to its materialization was undisturbed. So it was perfect in nirvana. He uses this Oriental view. He says in nirvana, before anything ever happened, like the universe had not created any kind of disturbance and chaos. That was perfect. But unfortunately for us, the world, nirvana, whatever, was lost, and disturbance appeared and chaos appeared, and with chaos we appeared. And how misfortunate are we as a result of that? I can't wait to die. I can't wait till the world ends. I can't wait to the end of suffering.
That's rather a Gnostic view, I think. That's rather a Gnostic view, when you're really starting to bring in that predominance of the war of good and evil, etc., and it's an evil world, and we're trying to get beyond and out of the evil world. That's a very Gnostic view.
Yeah, it is, and I guess that's the danger of it. I mean, I'm way too optimistic for that. I can't.
Me too.
Accept that.
Yeah.
What do you think, Sam? Are you swayed by those pessimistic arguments, or do you take the Stoic view, which sees the world as a kind of like a benevolent living God? Really, it gave birth to us. It's the source of our life in a certain kind of way.
Pragmatically, you have to choose the second one, because you have to live like that in order to live tomorrow, and you absolutely have to live like that in order to live with other people, because they can. You watch them, and especially when you stick around them, especially when you care about them, you can watch them spiral. You can watch them give up, and you have to believe that to demonstrate what living a good life could be, to encourage everyone around you, so they want to do it. Like
I agree with you. In fact, I've seen it in the same way as you just put it. I think if you can't convince yourself of the Stoic physics that the world actually is a benevolent cosmos, if you can't because you just don't like the argument, then at least you can do the pragmatic argument, which is not what the Stoics were doing, but that's what William James does. He comes up with, well, forget about the truth. Which one is the best to live by? And I agree with you. You can totally make this the pragmatic argument, and it comes out better than pessimism every single time.
I think you have to do it if you have believed in your family over a lifetime. If you grew up believing in your family and want to continue to do that as you mature, as you're an adult, and be an active part of that, like you have to do that. And maybe that sounds like pragmatism, or maybe that's just associating the bigger signs of life for the local ones that you're familiar with. But if the direction's similar, without making the picture too small that it's constraining, a good start. It's better than nihilism and pessimism.
Well, I prefer it to the view of aiming for the ultimate prize of heaven beyond death.
Yeah.
You know, I'd rather live now
That's my problem with the
in this life and deliver the best that we all possibly can and have the best hope of achieving that best thing as we possibly
that's my problem with street preachers.
Mm.
That I see them in the same way of most other modern narcissistic individuals, loving a world, loving the good outside of their world so they can get out of doing anything about it or caring about. And I don't even think they're living up to their own creed in their own sense to also love other people.
But you know, not
as much as I think it's deserved.
Not far from that view too, Jody, is the view that some modern white Buddhist types take up, where they're like, oh yeah, I want nirvana, just in the same way that people want heaven. So instead of living their lives, they go and lock themselves in a room and stare at the wall like for 20 hours a day. Like, why? So that they can miss out on their lives. Okay. Well, that sounds like shit. You know, like if you're that desperate, you know,
just finish it.
It seems like a surrogate for suicide, really, doesn't it?
It's postponed suicide.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I won't kill myself because I'm a coward, so I just won't live my life.
Yeah. Yeah, I really see in Stoicism a yes to life. It's a very Dionysian ecstasy. I know, like Nietzsche calls it an Apollonian tradition, but there is a Dionysian yes to life. I mean, yeah, you have to constantly be on guard and restrict it and contain it, but it is a growing forth. It's a movement towards its end. It's a lovely healthy growth.
Temperance doesn't have to mean self-control in like self-denial. It's about proper choice.
Yeah,
it's about proper choice. It's about, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
Because Nietzsche saw it as like a restrictive morality, really. But actually, another way to see it, if you apply this biological way of seeing, is it's a healthy mode of growth. Like no organism needs to grow at 1,000,000 miles an hour. That's cancer. It needs to grow in a steady, kind of structured way, not take more than the resources of the environment can supply it, and so on and so forth. So, yeah.
Which is that dance.
Yeah.
That dance you have with life, that dance you have with not, you know, that Apollonian limit is to not overeat, to not, you know, overfeed. But that Dionysian volition with restraint, you see that all the time in actual dancing, in partner dancing, in an excitement for the genuine, for the emotional, but constrained well enough to, you know, no one wants to dance with someone who dances like this.
True.
It creates a big barrier, like a stay away from me.
Well, and it's like Jody said, it's temperance, right? So it's the virtue of temperance. Even the organism knows that for it to live and to live well, it has to be temperate. It can't gobble up all the resources in its environment. Yeah. All right, let's do this one more and then we'll call it a night. Against Epicurus. Well,
your turn, Courtney.
Okay, let's see how different mine is from yours. Even Epicurus recognizes that we're social beings by nature. But once he has placed our good in our bodily shell, he is no longer in a position to say anything that conflicts with that, for he maintains forcefully, besides, that we should neither admire nor accept anything that is cut off from the nature of the good, and rightly so. How can we still be social beings then if we have no natural affection for our offspring? And why is it, Epicurus, that you seek to dissuade the wise person from rearing children? Why are you afraid that he'll suffer distress why are you afraid that he'll suffer distress as a consequence? What does it matter to him then if a little mouse cries out in his house? No, Epicurus was well aware that as soon as one has a small child, it's no longer in our power not to love it and take care of it. For the same reason, he says, anyone who has any sense won't engage in public affairs either, because he knows that a man in public life has to do. He knows what a man in public life has to do. And in truth, if you want to live among human beings as though among flies, who is to prevent you? Yet, even though he is well aware of this, he has the audacity to say that we shouldn't rear children. But when a sheep doesn't abandon its own offspring, and neither does wolf, will a human being abandon his? What do you want? That we should be as stupid as sheep, and yet they don't abandon their young, as savage as wolves, and yet they don't abandon their young. Come, who could be persuaded by what you say when he sees his little child in tears after having fallen to the ground? For my part, I think that even if your mother and father could have foreseen that you would say such things, they wouldn't have exposed you. That's
I like
kind of
that.
funny. Well, we've read a little bit about Epicurus, and we know that his main concern is that pleasure is the good, but actually specifically he has it as pain is evil. So it's not so much that he's after pleasure as we think of today, but rather an absence of pain is the goal. So he didn't really want to raise children because it seemed, well, it would compromise one's pleasure in life because it brings restriction
And
and
be
or
stuck with the pain and the pain that you
there
see
would be
of
more
a child.
pain.
Yeah.
Yeah, like he says here, if the child is injured and has pain, well, that would
I'm in
bring
pain.
pain. I'd experience pain, and if I'm experiencing some pain, well, then I'm not living the best good that I could possibly live, and therefore, who could be fucked with that kind of idea? And obviously, he's contrasting this with the Stoic idea of preconception, saying, well, you feel pain when your child falls over for a good reason, because nature, you are made in that way by nature. You're kind of ignoring this.
And ignoring the good sign, but you should feel
Yeah,
some relation that your child is in pain.
that we should be the kind of creatures that have children, obviously.
Which is another, which is a specific version of saying, no, you would want to live life, because Epicurus is it bounds everything and it makes an excuse not to live it.
It's a bit like what we were just talking
Yeah.
about with the Buddhist who doesn't want to complicate his life because it all seems so painful and difficult. So I think
Well,
Epicure,
it goes into the life of any
yeah,
monastery of any
yeah.
religion where you have a single gender society of people who have renounced life. Renounced being part of a general society. Yeah.
And Epicurus saw us very much like animals, didn't he? If I recall. Do you remember, Jody? We read it,
Yeah. Yeah.
Therapy of
Yeah.
Desire.
Mm.
And I'm just trying to remember the details, but basically he saw us as ultimately very similar to animals. That a lot of our, and it makes a lot of sense because he's got a view that's quite similar to what we would have as our kind of modern psychology nowadays. He has a view that basically we're just like animals, and a lot of our motivations and desires are very very much like the desires that animals have.
Did you want to ask me something?
Like almost we run mechanistically by biological impulses.
We're basically just evolved animals,
Yeah.
whereas the Stoics are doing something different. They're saying we're quite different from animals because we've got this rational part to ourselves which changes everything. And so I guess that's what Epictetus is sort of talking about there.
And I think he's demonstrating that, because I feel like 21 to 26 is about what level do you start the argument from, and then what are the ramifications of it.
Mm.
So now they started from, well, you're limited. The good is limited by the shell of the body. It's like that's not necessarily true,
Yeah.
because you'd be stuck with hating your children. You made the joke at the end that you'd be stuck with yourself being dead if your parents believe that.
Yeah,
Like
well, he's saying that it's so offensive what you're saying that, but however, because your parents, like all of nature, has this preconception to look after its offspring. The joke is, even though they wouldn't expose you, they wouldn't kill you anyway, but there's sort of like this idea behind that, isn't there, that maybe you should have been thrown out in the snow for having such offensive ideas or something. But the idea here, right, about the Epicurus thinking that we're very much like animals. In fact, that there's not much difference between us. Well, Epictetus is pointing out his inconsistency by saying, well, even sheep raise their children, and so do wolves. So what are you trying to say?
And I think as well, Epictetus is pointing out that even in Epicurus's denial of life, that's still an act of volition, unlike animals. The animals don't even have a real moral choice, but they're acting to raise their kids.
Mm.
Like to deny it is also a choice. I think that's another.
Yeah. Yeah, Epicurus is got this strange view that although we're very much like animals, we can work out what's good and what's bad, and therefore we can kind of maximize the best enjoyment of our life, and that would require these kinds of sacrifices. Obviously, Epictetus isn't going to shoot down his argument very easily in these
Yeah.
kind of throwaway lines, because if we remember, Epicurus's philosophy is pretty sophisticated, isn't it, Jody?
Mm. Yeah.
It basically is a form of atomism, if you've read any of it, Sam. He says that we're all made up of atoms, and that when we die, the atoms kind of break apart and get recycled into nature, which is kind of what we talk about these days. But there's no,
You don't have to read that. That's saturated for the culture. That's the cultural narrative being asked almost everywhere.
yeah, but this is Epicurus, so it would
Yeah,
have
exactly.
been pretty strange back then.
Yeah.
Whereas the
Yeah.
Stoics are saying, you know, that you can't do anything without God being involved in it. That there's this providential order, and there's this kind of fate that, you know, it causes everything to happen as it happens. Kind of. That's kind of what they're saying. Epicurus is just saying, nah, it's just random swerving of atoms. So there's a lot of people who read Epicurus, modern people would go, well, yeah, that makes a lot more sense than what the Stoics are talking about. But the Epicurus has a lot harder time grounding his ethics, I guess, because it's a hedonist, it's based around the absence of pleasure. And of course, that's the main distinction, is that the Stoics, if they want this idea of this moral character, and that it being the only, you know, virtue being the only good, and that the only such thing as good and evil exists in the way we use our rational part, and that good and evil doesn't exist in the world, and that's why we shouldn't be concerned about external things, then you need a much more sophisticated ethical system. But Epicurus has some pretty interesting medicines. Do you remember the tetrapharmakos, Judy?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. See if you can recall it. Bring it to mind. His fourfold medicine, the tetrapharmakos.
Oh,
There's nothing to fear in God. That's one of them.
There's nothing to fear
There's nothing to fear from the gods is one
from
of
the
his
gods.
principles. The second one is there's nothing to fear in death.
Yeah,
The
that's right.
evil is easy to endure.
Yeah.
And what was the last one?
We'll
Evil
have
is
to.
easy to endure, and the good is easy to acquire. That's these four. If you think about it, that's his fourfold truths or whatever. They're very effective. He's saying the good's easy to acquire, because what he's saying is if you restrict your pleasure to just really basic things, because that's what he does, then it's easy to satisfy your desires. Like he's apparently lived on bread and water and stuff like that. It was that kind of simple pleasure. But then he says the evil is easy to endure, because he says evil for him is pain. So he says pain's endurable because it has a natural limit. If it gets too bad, you just die. So nothing to worry about there. And there's nothing to worry about in death, because we're just atoms. It's not like we're going to get punished and live in hellfire. We just disintegrate. And the fourth one, nothing to fear from the gods, because he thinks that the gods have nothing to do with us. So there's nothing to worry about. They're not going to hurt us or punish us
If Epicurus was alive and wrote in 1880, he would have been a millionaire. like for modern people.
I'm
That would have eaten it up.
I'm a bit puzzled by that one where he claimed that there's nothing to fear about pain, because really his whole philosophy was about avoidance of pain. That's where I used to think, yeah, that was a bit of a hard one.
Well, I think he's saying the kind of being that we are, it's generally easy to be able to satisfy our needs.
Mm.
See, and kind of makes sense. I mean, we're never in a situation where we're in so much pain that we can't find that it goes on forever, or that it's going to drive us mad or something like that. Because I guess he's saying it's all right. You're going to die if it gets that bad. So don't worry about it.
It's a prophylactic for the anxiety of living.
Yeah, it's a consolation. So he calls it the fourfold medicine. It takes the anxiety out of life. If that was all you got from philosophy, you'd be doing all right. Like, why am I worried about my job? Like, pleasure's easy to satisfy. All I need is a loaf of bread and some water, and I'm doing good.
And I think for a lot of modern people that, we've been inculcated to just live in the mind, and we haven't had a lot of physical experiences where you get rattled up, you get exposed and have to stress yourself and get tested, and then test their own limits of anxiety. I think that would be a very popular message.
And you could see where the conflict with Epicurus and Epictetus, or the Stoics, would come in, because the Stoics put themselves in the line of fire. They're living in a public life. They're willing to undergo privation and difficulties because they're not concerned about what happens to them, because the only good that they really concerned with is their appropriate use of things, their internal stuff. And Epicurus would be like, what is wrong with you? Like, just go and live in a garden and avoid all those shenanigans. What are you doing hanging around with children and aggressive emperors and stuff like that? Fucking hell, stay away from all that.
But the two are a demonstration of how confident you are in life. Like how good you think it really is.
How good, what is?
Life.
Oh, yeah,
like the Buddha's, like, the characters we've talked about before are like, oh, it's not worth anything, it's nihilistic. This is fairly something, but it has its limits, and you shouldn't try any further than that. The Stoic answer is much hungrier for life.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I've often thought that it's to do with a certain positive attitude. So if you have the attitude about life like, wow, I'm alive, this is amazing, and I'm going to die one day and I don't want to kind of waste it. If you have that attitude, you're going to want to be involved in the world. You're going to be looking to get the best out of it because this is my only opportunity. I really want to live. But if you don't see it that way, if you just see it as bleak and like atoms and it's void and it all is meaningless anyway, and I'm just going to die, well, then you're not going to have that attitude. You're not going to have the affective component. It's just going to be like, why am I putting myself under all this pressure? Might as well just go and join a cult, live in a garden and eat, what do you call it? Oat grass or wheat grass, and
or give up on any office or participation in society, or even participation in your own family.
Put henna in my hair. Anyway. Yeah, well, there you go. We should wrap it up for the evening.
Yeah, it is. It's a very positive philosophy. There's no doubt about it. I find it positive on every
And I think that
on every aspect.
Modern Stoicism should talk more about the attitudinal side of it. They don't actually talk about it very much, but
well, even the emotive side of it, because as you say, that mistaken idea that it's a suppression of emotion. It's not. It's a focus on correct emotion, or using emotion in a useful, advantageous way to
I
your.
think it's a joyful philosophy.
Yes, joy. Yes, it is. It is a joyful philosophy. Yeah.
And I've been excited about it as I've gotten the chance to start experiencing it. Like what you said, Courtney, on that round table, it's an excitement in the Dionysian way, where so many of our other like ethical systems is punitive,
Mm-hmm.
really, or nihilistic.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
even the way that modern Stoics couched it in the psychological language, they just talk about cognition, but they don't really spend time talking about the affect, which is emotion, They do. They even don't really make that connection strongly that, well, Crispus says that the affect is actually just a form of belief. They're identical. So if you hold the belief, the fundamental belief that you have a piece of Zeus inside of you and that you can use that to be always be free, well, what kind of effect will come from that belief? They missed that little point. Well, I
Yeah.
know what it would be, a kind of
Giant
joyfulness
joy, of course
and
it would.
relief. And oh
Yeah.
my God, I'm so lucky that I
Yeah.
live in a world where I was given this particular start right from the
Mm.
outset, that I'm this
Mm.
kind of being and not some other kind of being.
Mm.
Mm. And that's
Yeah.
an antidote right there for depression, hopefully, for some people.
Yes.
Not only an antidote for depression, like a relief to that feeling of not wanting to be alive, but also an encouragement to
Mm.
want to be alive and to act maliciously
Yeah,
and refine it well.
and to see what's going to happen next,
Oh.
and to that's why I use this metaphor. I sent Sam something about some of my weird ideas, but I love this idea of seeing the world as being given to you every moment. So, like it's being given to you. This friendship, whatever, this conversation we're having is being given to us. Have a cup of tea with me, it's being given to me. There's constant act of gratitude.
Yes.
And
Gratitude.
yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
And all those things that are good, that are revealing of good character or something quality, you can't force.
yeah,
Whenever you try and force it, it disappears. It's
yeah,
not.
that's right.
It,
And
it's given. It's not forced.
it seems elusive, but on the other hand, there's a reciprocity because we're forced to make use of things. And if we make use of them as if they were given to us by a loving universe, then it reveals something about you at the same time. So it's not about trying to pretend to be something like a guy with a stick up his bum, like in the earlier one, but rather just in the very act of seeing things in this kind of a way reveals your character to be a certain kind of way. I think I like that anyway. The more I think like that, the more I just feel it's such an easy philosophy. Because I think some people have
Mm.
made this a very complicated philosophy and a very difficult philosophy.
But I
Well,
think not. You go
sorry,
ahead,
Sam.
Jess.
No, you go. You
I
go.
was going to quickly say, I think not many people practice getting out of being Cartesian or out of being materialist.
Mm.
They associate with themselves being a set of atoms. They don't reflect. They don't notice how much that they are training themselves to act as characters in relation to other characters.
Yeah, they forget about their moral agency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes, please, Jody.
I was going to just suggest that out of tonight's talk, the three of us should try to at least propose a topic question for this next meeting. I think just from what we've said tonight, there's some lovely insights to things that we could be sharing with the group, as a whole. So it'd be nice to try to put forward some topic questions for this
Yeah.
next thing. Yeah.
If you
Well,
guys could
yeah.
jot anything down that comes to mind, let me know. Send me a text or an
Mm.
email or something, and
Mm.
yeah, well, I will try and get on top of that. And
Because I think it would be a really good thing to explore, leading on from what you were talking about on Saturday, just to give some consistency or continuity, to go into some other aspects of emotion, of how it
yeah,
relates.
like the positive
Yeah, yeah,
existential attitude or
yes,
whatever.
yeah. I think that would be a really good one to push because I think that's a practical application as
Oh yeah,
well.
that's a good point.
Yeah. And I think people are very much looking for that practical.
It's a hard one to cultivate though, because I've thought at times like, oh, I wonder if you could come up with an exercise for this, but you can't. It comes from
uh,
holding certain beliefs.
yeah, it does. I know it. I know exactly what you're saying. And without sort of starting to push the physics and side of things, you get
Yeah, and see, people really struggle with seeing that, even if they can't understand it, it could be taken as metaphorical. You don't have to imagine that Zeus really put a spark inside of you, but if they could see that there's something in us or something about us that makes us always free, and like that Sisyphean
so and that's another
image.
good thing, to a topic of freedom as a
They're
stoic freedom.
always existentially free. If they could see that, you'd imagine it would translate into a kind of attitude or an effect.
An effect, yes.
Yeah. Like,
Anyway.
I'm so grateful and happy.
I think the 5-10 minute version of the question that a lot of people can be invited to is, what do they think their attraction to Stoicism is? What have they recognized in it? What do they, it's their door opener. And for everyone, and including me, that could be a humble thing. Like, what are the signs that you're seeing? What are you liking about it here?
What are you liking about it? That's a good one. That's a practical one. Write some of these down though, and let me know, because you guys have different perspectives than me. I get a bit lost in my head sometimes.
Yeah, no, I'll email you with a little few thoughts, and I'll share. Sam, what's your email? Oh no, anyway,
I can send that to you later. Yeah.
Oh, you could. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, good.
I'll just put it in the chat now.
Beautiful.
Do you want to look at?
And you guys have mine anyway. So
exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, that was a good chat. It was a bit different, so it was fun.
Yeah, we only really got through what, 3?
And that's kind of what we've been doing every single time, pretty much. Yeah.
21, 22.
I think it's going to take us about 10 years to get through this book.
That's all right.
We're still in 1.
All right. Well, look, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
See you guys. Good chatting again. Always good, Jody. And it's good getting to know you a bit, Sam. It's nice.
This has been really fun.
I've
look forward to these.
Yeah, I really enjoy it too. So thanks a lot. Okay.
See you later.
Bye.
Good week.